The Adventure of the Forger's End, by John H. Watson, M.D. It is with a certain sense of duty, both to my long-suffering readers and to the memory of my singular friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, that I now commit to paper the details of a case which, for its sheer audacity and the labyrinthine nature of its deceptions, stands prominent in my recollections. For many years I was bound by a solemn promise to the principal person involved not to divulge the facts, for the affair touched upon matters of such delicacy that a public airing would have caused a scandal of the first water. The gentleman in question has now passed beyond the reach of earthly praise or censure, and his heirs have graciously seen fit to release me from my vow. The world may now know the truth of the affair, which I, in my private records, have labelled the case of Archie Stamford, the forger. The year was 95, a year marked by a series of high-profile cases which had followed one another with such rapidity that even Holmes's constitution, which was wrought of iron and nerve, had begun to show the strain. After the successful conclusion of the Abernethy family tragedy, a profound and listless torpor had descended upon our rooms at 221B Baker Street. For 3 days Holmes had uttered scarcely a word, alternating between melancholy airs upon his violin and long periods of silent contemplation in his armchair, his thin, aesthetic face wreathed in the acrid smoke of his strongest shag tobacco. I knew these signs of old. His brilliant mind, deprived of the intricate problems upon which it fed, was beginning to turn inwards and prey upon itself. "Watson, you have been staring at me for the better part of 10 minutes, he remarked suddenly, without opening his eyes. "If you have a diagnosis to offer, I should be glad to hear it." "I was merely concerned, Holmes," I replied, laying down my copy of the Lancet. "Such inactivity is a dangerous thing for a mind like yours." "The mind is like a motor, my dear fellow," he sighed, a thin blue wisp of smoke curling towards the ceiling. "It must have fuel, or it will grind itself to pieces. London is a vast cesspool of humanity, and yet for all its 7 million souls, there is not one who can furnish me with a problem worthy of the name. The criminal classes have become distressingly dull. It is all brutish violence and artless theft. The fine art of crime, the subtlety, the intellectual challenge, it appears to be a lost practice." He gestured with the stem of his pipe towards the morning's paper, which lay discarded upon the floor. "Look at this. A publican bludgeoned in Whitechapel, a society lady's jewels lifted in Mayfair. A child could solve such matters. There is no room for deduction, no scope for the scientific reasoner. It is a desert, Watson, a veritable desert." I was about to offer some placating remark when the sharp peal of our doorbell cut through the quiet gloom of the room. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson showed in a gentleman whose entire bearing bespoke breeding and authority. He was tall and silver-haired, with a ramrod-straight posture that even his evident agitation could not entirely undo. His face was pale, his hands clenched so tightly around the brim of his top hat that the knuckles showed white. He was dressed in the finest tweed, yet he wore it with the air of a man for whom such luxury was as natural as breathing. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired, his voice a low, cultured baritone that trembled slightly. My friend rose with a flicker of interest in his weary eyes. "I am he. And you, I perceive, are Sir Reginald Hawthorne. I am familiar with your excellent monograph on the early Minoan dynasties. Pray, take a seat. You appear to be labouring under some great distress." Our visitor started, his eyes wide with astonishment. "How on earth could you know my name?" Holmes smiled his thin, wintry smile. "The name is inconsequential. I read it upon the leather band inside your hat. It is your profession, which I deduced. Your left cuff bears the unmistakable chalky dust of museum archives, and the slight callus upon your right forefinger is that of a man who spends a great deal of his time with a pen, not on matters of commerce, but of scholarship. Given your bearing, a baronetcy is a reasonable assumption. The subject of your study I gleaned from the small but distinctive clay figurine attached to your watch chain, a rather fine replica of the Cretan snake goddess. Now, Sir Reginald, how may I be of service to you?" The baronet sank into the chair I proffered, passing a hand over his brow. "Mr. Holmes, your reputation does not do you justice. I am at my wit's end. My honour, my family's name, everything I have built over a lifetime is poised upon the brink of utter ruin." "And the cause?" Holmes asked, leaning forward now. His lethargy vanished as if by magic. His eyes shone with that keen, hawk-like intensity that I had seen so often when the game was afoot. Sir Reginald hesitated, then reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He produced a single sheet of foolscap, which he handled as though it were a venomous snake. His hand shook as he passed it to Holmes. "This," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is the cause." Holmes took the letter and spread it upon the table beneath the gaslight. I moved to his side to examine it myself. It was written on thick, cream-coloured stationery, identical to the sheet Sir Reginald had used to send his card up to us. The handwriting was a fluid, aristocratic script, and the message it contained was as concise as it was damning. It was a signed confession, dated some 25 years prior, admitting to a matter of cheating at cards against a young nobleman at Cambridge, an act which had resulted in the other man's financial and social ruin. "I see," said Holmes, his voice neutral. "And this is your handwriting?" "It is a perfect, an absolutely flawless imitation," Sir Reginald declared, his voice choked with emotion. "The ink, the paper, the very pressure of the nib upon the page. It is my hand, Mr. Holmes, and yet I swear upon my life I never wrote it. The event it describes, it is a gross and malicious falsehood." "You have received a demand, I presume?" "I have. A letter arrived yesterday demanding the sum of £10,000. If it is not paid by the end of the week, this vile fabrication will be sent to the committee of my club and to the editors of the society papers." "And the blackmailer?" "He remains anonymous, of course, but in his letter he was so arrogant, so utterly sure of himself, that he saw fit to taunt me. He named the artist who had crafted this forgery for him, a man, he wrote, by the name of Archie Stamford." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Archie Stamford. The name is not unknown to me. A petty forger of cheques and promissory notes, a competent but uninspired hand. He has served 2 terms at Her Majesty's pleasure. His usual work is crude, detectable to a trained eye. This, however," he tapped the letter with a long, thin finger, "this is not the work of a common criminal. This is the work of a master. The aging of the ink is chemically perfect. The faint water stain in the top corner has been applied with a knowledge of paper composition that is truly remarkable. Stamford may have been the tool, Sir Reginald, but the mind behind this is of a far higher calibre. But what am I to do, Mr. Holmes? To pay is to admit guilt and to place my neck in a noose for the rest of my days. To refuse is to face public disgrace over a lie. I am trapped. The first step, said Holmes, rising to his feet and grabbing his coat, is to remove the tool from the artist's hand. We must pay a visit to Mr. Archie Stamford. Watson, your revolver. There is a palpable air of evil about this affair that I do not care for. The game, my dear friend, is afoot. Our journey to the residence of Mr. Stamford took us from the stately squares of Belgravia to the squalid, gas-lit warren of streets that lies south of the river in the borough of Lambeth. The hansom cab rattled over cobbled streets, slick with a persistent autumn drizzle, the foggy air growing thicker and more yellow with every turn. It was a landscape of grim tenements and grimy public houses, a world away from the orderly life of our client. Holmes was silent for the duration of the journey, his chin sunk upon his chest, his brow furrowed in concentration. He held the forged letter in his hand, occasionally raising it to the foggy light of the cab's lantern, studying it through his pocket lens with an intensity that seemed to penetrate the very fibres of the paper. Stamford's address, as supplied by Holmes's encyclopedic knowledge of the London underworld, was a room on the 3rd floor of a dilapidated lodging house. The air in the stairwell was thick with the scent of boiled cabbage and damp rot. As we ascended the creaking stairs, a door opened on the landing below, and a stout, red-faced woman in a grubby apron eyed us with suspicion. "If you're looking for Stamford, you'll get no answer," she volunteered. "Ain't heard a peep from him all day. Quiet as the grave he's been." Holmes thanked her and continued upwards. He paused outside the door to Stamford's room, his head cocked to one side like a hunting dog on the scent. He did not knock. Instead, he knelt, his keen eyes pressed to the keyhole for a brief instant. Then he sniffed at the crack beneath the door. "Watson," he said in a low, urgent voice, "there is a smell of bitter almonds. And something else. A woman's perfume. L'heure bleue, expensive, distinctive. It has no place in a hovel like this." Without another word, he put his shoulder to the door. It was a flimsy affair, and the lock burst from its rotten frame with a splintering crack. We stumbled into the room, and the scene that met our eyes was one of grim and silent tragedy. The room was small and squalid, containing little more than a narrow bed, a rickety washstand, and a small wooden desk. And seated at that desk, slumped forward in his chair, was the man who could only be Archie Stamford. His head rested upon his arms, amidst a scattered collection of pens, ink pots, and sheets of paper. In his right hand, a pen was still loosely clasped. Beside his left hand stood a small empty phial, its label clearly marked Laudanum. The faint, sweet and sickly smell we had noted was stronger here. On the desk, directly beneath his gaze, was a sheet of paper upon which he had been practicing a signature. It was the elegant, looping script of Sir Reginald Hawthorne. A burly, florid man in a bowler hat was already in the room, kneeling by the body. He looked up as we entered, his face a mask of annoyance. It was Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. "Holmes!" he exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. "What in blazes are you doing here? This is an official police investigation." "I might ask the same of you, Lestrade," Holmes replied coolly, his eyes already sweeping every corner of the small, grim room. "Though I imagine your presence is due to a more conventional summons than my own. The landlady found him an hour ago when he didn't answer for his rent," the inspector grumbled. "It's as plain a case as I've ever seen. The man was a known forger. He gets involved in a high-stakes blackmail plot, loses his nerve, and takes the coward's way out. He even left a note of a sort," he added, gesturing proudly at the practiced signatures on the desk. "Confession in his own tradecraft." "Indeed, very convenient," Holmes murmured, his gaze fixed on the dead man. "Tell me, Inspector, what do you make of the pen?" Lestrade blinked. "The pen? He's a forger. He died holding a pen. What's to make of it?" "Only that my records indicate Stamford was left-handed, a fact confirmed by the slight ink smudge on the outer edge of his left palm. Why, then, would a man, in the final act of his life, choose to hold a pen so unnaturally in his right hand?" Lestrade's jaw dropped slightly. He stared at the body, then back at Holmes, his blustering confidence beginning to deflate. "And the file," Holmes continued, pointing with his cane. "It is placed to his left, within easy reach of his natural hand. Yet the pen is in his right. It is a small inconsistency, but it is upon such details that truth depends. This scene was arranged, Inspector. It was designed to look like a suicide." My friend now began a minute examination of the room, moving like a wraith, his eyes missing nothing. He scrutinized the threadbare carpet, peered at the muddy scuff marks near the door, and scraped a small sample of dust from the windowsill into an envelope. He paid particular attention to the dead man's clothes and hands. "Ah," he breathed, holding his lens over the dead man's waistcoat. "What have we here?" I peered over his shoulder. Clinging to the rough wool of the waistcoat was a single long strand of dark, lustrous hair. Holmes carefully plucked it with his tweezers and sealed it within another envelope. "The plot thickens, Watson. Our suicide victim had a visitor. A female visitor, judging by the hair and the lingering perfume. A woman of some social standing, I might add." "But Holmes," I interjected, "if this was murder, how was it done? There are no signs of a struggle." "The poison, my dear Watson, the poison. The laudanum was a blind. A powerful opiate, certainly, but slow and uncertain. The true agent was prussic acid, administered, no doubt, in a glass of brandy or some such spirit. The faint scent of bitter almonds is the key. A single, fast-acting dose. Our man would have been dead in moments. The murderer then had ample time to arrange the scene for Lestrade's benefit, to place the empty laudanum phial, to dip the pen in ink and place it in the victim's right hand, and to depart unseen. Lestrade, who had been listening with a mixture of awe and resentment, finally found his voice. "Murder? But who would murder a common forger? Someone for whom his silence was worth more than his skill," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. "Someone who used him to create a masterpiece and then discarded him like a broken tool. Our blackmailer Lestrade is also a killer, and a remarkably cunning one. He or she has made only 1 or 2 minute errors. The wrong hand for the pen, a single strand of hair, a lingering scent of perfume. It is not much to go on, but it is a start." He straightened up and turned towards the door. "We can do no more here. You may have your constables and your photographers, Lestrade. I must return to Baker Street to think. But I leave you with this piece of advice. Do not look for the culprit in the slums of Lambeth. You must look in the drawing rooms of Belgravia. The following morning found us travelling through the crisp autumn air towards Hawthorne Manor in the heart of the Kent countryside. Sir Reginald, when informed of the grim turn of events, had turned a ghastly shade of pale, but had insisted we conduct our investigation at his home, offering us the full run of the estate. The manor was a magnificent Elizabethan pile, its red brick walls covered in ivy, set amid sprawling lawns and ancient oak trees. It was the very picture of old English wealth and stability, a stark contrast to the sordid tragedy we had left behind in London. We were met at the door by Sir Reginald himself, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Holmes, this is a dreadful business. To think that a man has been murdered, and all on my account." "Guilt is a luxury we cannot afford at present, Sir Reginald," Holmes said briskly. "I must ask to speak with the members of your household. Separately, if you please." Our first interview was with Sir Reginald's wife, Lady Beatrice Hawthorne. She was a woman perhaps 20 years younger than her husband, with a startling dark beauty and eyes that held a deep, melancholic expression. She received us in her private sitting room, a delicate feminine space filled with French furniture and porcelain figurines. And as we entered, I was struck by a familiar scent. It was faint, but unmistakable. L'heure bleue. Holmes, I noted, gave no sign of recognition. His manner was courteous and gentle as he questioned her about her movements on the previous day. "I was in London, Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice soft and musical. "I was visiting my dressmaker in Bond Street, and then I took tea at the Langham. I returned here on the 5 o'clock train. Did you, at any point, have cause to travel south of the river? To Lambeth, for instance?" A flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed her features, but it was gone in an instant. "Good heavens, no! Why would I ever go to such a place?" "I merely ask. This is a murder investigation, Lady Beatrice. We must explore every possibility, however remote." Holmes paused, his eyes fixed on her face. "Are you happy in your marriage?" The question was so abrupt, so shockingly intimate, that I saw her flinch. Sir Reginald, who had insisted on being present, let out a cry of protest. "Holmes, really, that is entirely uncalled for." "On the contrary," my friend replied calmly, his gaze never leaving the woman's face. "In a case of blackmail, the fault lines within a family are of paramount importance. The secret that is being used against you, Sir Reginald, is one that threatens the foundations of this house. I must know where those foundations are weakest." Lady Beatrice rose to her feet, her composure regained. "My marriage to my husband is a private matter, Mr. Holmes. I can tell you nothing that will help you find this killer." She swept from the room, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Sir Reginald looked utterly crestfallen. Our next subject was Mr. Alistair Finch, Sir Reginald's private secretary for the past 15 years. He was a man of indeterminate age, thin, pale, and as precise in his speech as he was in his neat, dark attire. He maintained Sir Reginald's library and study, a vast book-lined chamber where our interview took place. "Mr. Finch," Holmes began, "you have complete access to Sir Reginald's papers, his correspondence, his signature?" "Of course," Finch replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "It is my duty." "Are you an admirer of his penmanship?" Finch blinked. I have not considered it. It is a typical hand for a gentleman of his education. But you could reproduce it if you had to. I am a secretary, Mr. Holmes, not a forger. The reply was cold, a subtle rebuke. Naturally. Tell me about Mr. Julian Croft. For the first time, a flicker of feeling crossed Finch's impassive face, a deep and abiding contempt. Mr. Croft is Sir Reginald's nephew, and a thorough disgrace to the family name, a wastrel, a gambler, and a drunkard. Sir Reginald, in his generosity, provides him with a small allowance, which he invariably squanders. He would stand to inherit, would he not, in the absence of a direct heir? He would. It is a prospect I find most disagreeable. After Finch had departed, Holmes made a slow circuit of the library, his eyes scanning the shelves. He paused by the secretary's desk, which was a model of perfect order. He picked up a blotter and examined it with his lens. He then moved to a large glass cabinet in the corner of the room, which housed a collection of rare pottery. "Interesting, Watson," he murmured, pointing to a fine grey dust that had settled on the shelf beneath a large Etruscan vase. "Note the colour and texture of this clay dust. Most peculiar. Our final interview was with the nephew himself, Julian Croft. We found him, as Finch had suggested we might, in the smoky taproom of the local village inn. He was a handsome young man, but his face was dissolute and his eyes held a sullen, resentful fire. He was already half intoxicated, though it was barely past noon. He sneered when we introduced ourselves. "So the old man has called in the bloodhounds, has he? Let me save you the trouble. I hate my uncle. He is a pompous, self-righteous old fossil who sits on a mountain of gold while his own flesh and blood scrapes by. Do I wish him ill? Of course I do. Did I try to blackmail him? I wish I'd had the ingenuity. It would have served him right." "Where were you yesterday afternoon, Mr. Croft?" Holmes asked, his tone casual. "Yesterday? Let me see." He gave a theatrical sigh. "I was at the races at Sandown. Lost my last £50 on a nag that is likely still running. I was in the company of half a dozen fellows who can attest to it." He grinned insolently. "So you see, I couldn't possibly have been in a slum in Lambeth, murdering a forger. A pity." As we left the inn, I felt a sense of confusion. We had a web of secrets and resentments, but nothing tangible. "Well, Holmes," I said, "what do you make of it all? The nephew has the motive, the secretary has the access, and the wife wears the perfume." "Precisely, Watson," he replied, a grim smile playing on his lips. "It is a delightful three-pipe problem. Each of them is hiding something. Lady Beatrice lied about her visit to London. Finch's calm demeanour conceals a powerful emotion. And Croft's alibi, while plausible, could have been established by a man who then slipped away for an hour or two. We have the threads in our hands. Now we must see which one leads us through the labyrinth." Back in London, Holmes closeted himself in our rooms for 24 hours. The air grew thick with the fumes of his chemical experiments as he analysed the scrapings from Stamford's room and the ink from the forged letter. The silence was broken only by the occasional clink of a test tube or a triumphant cry of "Aha!" I knew better than to disturb him during these periods of intense concentration. On the second evening, he finally emerged from his laboratory corner, his face grimy, but his eyes shining with an almost fanatical light. "It is done, Watson. The chain is complete. Every link is in its place. There will be a most interesting gathering in this very room tomorrow evening. I have sent telegrams to all the principal actors in our little drama. I have also taken the liberty of inviting Inspector Lestrade. He may wish to have his handcuffs ready." The following evening, our small sitting room was crowded with a most incongruous assembly. Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice sat stiffly on the sofa, a picture of marital frost. Julian Croft lounged sullenly by the window, while Alistair Finch stood ramrod straight by the mantelpiece, his face impassive. Inspector Lestrade stood by the door, looking important and confused. Holmes stood before the fireplace, dominating the room, his tall, thin figure silhouetted against the flames. "I have asked you all here," he began, his voice crisp and commanding, "to witness the conclusion of the unfortunate matter concerning the death of Archie Stamford and the blackmail of Sir Reginald Hawthorne." He turned first to Lestrade. "The police theory, Inspector, was that Stamford committed suicide out of guilt. I have proven this to be false. Stamford was murdered. The question is, by whom?" He then faced Julian Croft. "Mr. Croft, you had the strongest motive. You are in debt, you despise your uncle, and you would inherit his fortune. However, the crime committed here is one of supreme intelligence and subtlety. It required a deep knowledge of chemistry, paper, and calligraphy. With all due respect, sir, it is a crime quite beyond your talents. You are a man of passion, not of patience. You are free from suspicion." Croft stared, a mixture of relief and insult on his face. Holmes's gaze then fell upon Lady Beatrice, who visibly paled. "My lady, you were not entirely truthful with us. You did indeed go to Lambeth on the day of the murder. The scent of your perfume and the strand of your hair found in his room are undeniable proof. You went there to see Stamford, did you not?" Lady Beatrice burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "Yes," she sobbed. "It's true. I was so unhappy, so desperate. Reginald is a good man, but he is cold, distant. I felt like a bird in a gilded cage. I don't know what I wanted. Some power over him, some way to make him see me. I found out about this forger, Stamford. I wrote to him, asking him to create a letter, some foolish, harmless fabrication that I could use to frighten my husband. I went to his rooms to give him the final payment and collect the letter. But when I arrived, he was already dead, just as you found him. I saw the file, the pen. I panicked and fled. I swear to you, I never touched him." Sir Reginald looked at his wife, his stern face filled not with anger, but with a profound and wounded sorrow. "I believe you, my lady," Holmes said gently, "for you see, you were merely a pawn in a much deeper and more sinister game. You provided the opportunity, but another hand seized it." He spun around and fixed his piercing gaze upon the one remaining figure. "Alistair Finch!" The secretary did not move a muscle. Only a slight tightening of his thin lips betrayed any reaction. "It was a masterpiece of a crime, Finch," Holmes continued, his voice hardening. "A crime of patience, of intellect, and of monumental hatred. For 15 years you have served Sir Reginald faithfully, all the while plotting your revenge." "Revenge?" whispered Sir Reginald. For one... "Tell him, Finch, tell him about the card game at Cambridge 25 years ago. The game was not a falsehood, was it? It was real. You cheated, Sir Reginald. You ruined a young man named Thomas Finch. And he, in his despair, took his own life a year later, leaving behind a son who vowed to one day exact a terrible price for his father's destruction." Alistair Finch's composure finally shattered. his face contorted into a mask of pure venom. "He deserved it," he spat, his voice a low hiss. "He and his kind, they walk through life, ruining lesser men, and never look back. I dedicated my life to this. I studied his habits, his writing, his chemistry. I became his shadow, his perfect servant. When I discovered Lady Beatrice's pathetic little plot, it was a gift from the heavens. I intercepted her letters to Stamford. I met with the forger myself, not as a client, but as his new paymaster. I provided him with the authentic paper and ink samples he needed to begin his work. But Stamford's work, while competent, would not have been perfect." Holmes cut in. "You knew that. You are the true artist. You allowed Stamford to do the preliminary work, then you went to his rooms. You murdered him with prussic acid, a poison whose traces you believed would evaporate. You then took his work and, with your own genius, perfected it, creating the flawless document you sent to Sir Reginald. You planted the laudanum, arranged the scene, and walked away, confident that you had created an insoluble mystery and the perfect tool for your revenge." "And I would have succeeded," Finch snarled. "How could you possibly have known?" "You made 3 small errors," said Holmes, ticking them off on his fingers. "First, the perfume and the hair left by Lady Beatrice, which proved someone else had been there. Second, the pen in the wrong hand, a telling piece of psychological blindness. You saw him as a forger, so you gave him a pen, forgetting the man himself. But your greatest error was one of hubris. In your desire for perfection, you created your own ink, using a secret formula to replicate the aging process. But you added a unique binding agent to prevent feathering. A gum derived from a rare orchid, Dendrophylax lindani, which you cultivate in the hothouse at Hawthorne Manor. The same hothouse where you collected the fine clay dust on your shoes, a sample of which I found on the floor of Stamford's room, from the pots you so carefully tend. Your passion for orchids, Mr. Finch, has proved to be your undoing." As Holmes finished, Finch let out a cry of pure rage and lunged not at Holmes, but at Sir Reginald. But Lestrade, galvanized into action at last, was faster. He threw himself forward, and in a moment the struggling secretary was subdued and in handcuffs, his face a terrible mask of defeated fury. Later that night, back in the comforting chaos of our Baker Street rooms, Holmes sat opposite me, a well-satisfied expression on his face. "An excellent result, Watson," he remarked, lighting his pipe, "though it is a melancholy business. Sir Reginald, I believe, has learned a harsh lesson in humility. He intends to make a quiet but substantial restitution to the distant relatives of the man he wronged. Perhaps he and his wife may yet find some happiness together, now that their respective secrets are in the open." "It was your reasoning about the ink, Holmes, that was truly masterful," I said. "How did you ever think to look for an orchid?" "Every artist has a signature, Watson, whether he paints on canvas or forges a confession. Finch's signature was his perfectionism, his pride. He could not resist adding his own unique touch to the ink, a flourish that he believed no one else on earth could ever detect. It is vanity that is the undoing of us all. The criminal, in his arrogance, will always leave a thread for the logical reasoner to pull. And when you pull it, the entire sordid tapestry unravels." He puffed on his pipe for a moment, and a thoughtful look came into his eyes. "It is a strange thing, Watson. In Alistair Finch we saw a brilliant mind, a capacity for patience and detail that would have made him a leader in any honest field. And yet he chose to dedicate it all to the dark path of revenge. It confirms my belief that the line between genius and criminality is a fine one indeed. And as the smoke wreathed his head in the lamplight, I knew that his mind was at peace once more. The craving for complexity sated, at least for a little while. Outside, the great dark city of London murmured on. But for tonight, one small corner of its vast, intricate web of mystery had been brilliantly illuminated.